Chair recognizes Ms. Bush.
Thank you. To Mr. Dunn, my condolences. Very, very sorry for your tremendous loss. To Judge Samaniego, thank you very much for your testimony and for listening and enduring and for giving your testimony. St. Louis and I are here to recognize the humanity of all people, regardless of immigration status. You know, we are here in opposition to any racist agenda pursued by Republicans. And let's take a moment to reflect on this first month of Republican control of the House. The disastrous and embarrassing Speaker's vote that resulted in the selling of the gavel to a bunch of pro-coup members of Congress, the seating of insurrectionists and someone who defrauded his way into Congress. That's where we are. And now this hearing, whose purpose, it seems, is to amplify the anti-immigrant hysteria and right-wing conspiracy theories. The Republican position on immigration is to inflict as much cruelty as possible on people fleeing suffering and persecution. As Democrats, we need to recognize this reality and refuse to be a part of it. That's why I strongly oppose the administration's expansion of Title 42 and the reinstatement of the asylum transit ban. These lawless and inhumane policies deny the right to asylum while failing to address any of the underlying structural problems of our immigration system. So, Judge Samaniego, I want to ask you, do you believe Title 42 is an effective or a humane immigration policy?
It is not. And I thank you for being practical, because I need to get back to this idea of detaining them until they're able to vet them. That's one of the most impractical things I've ever heard of. Right now, Border Patrol is shivering, thinking, how are we going to do that? Without the community being involved, we're pushing that on them, where they have 1,400 spaces, and we're going to detain them. And we talk about the humanity of the Border Patrol. Just think about what it would take to detain until we vet them. It'd be impossible. I remember growing up and we'd say, you know, how do you put 50 people in a Volkswagen, 25 in the front, 25 in the back? Mm-hmm. That's about as impractical as this idea of detaining them until you can let them go when you don't have the facility, you don't have the manpower, and it's those impractical solutions that confuse people. And so I tell you that we know we've been able to manage things, and we know that when there's issues in other parts of the border, it's because of the lack of organization, it's the lack of collaboration, it's a lack of a lot of different things. So when you have people running in to your country because you're not well organized and you're not using collaboration, we've had 2 or 3 incidents. We have 800 people out that we're not able to manage because of funding. There's communities that have had as many as 10,000 because they're not organized properly. So I can tell you our strategy works, and if people listen to it and we were able to share the ideas and how we've been successful, I can tell you that we minimize the problem, incredibly minimize the problem for the federal government. And there should be some kind of appreciation for a community that is sensible about what's happening in El Paso, and we all know that we don't want it to happen to the rest of the nation. And all we hear is, you know, that I used the wrong word or that I said racist. I never said that. What I said is that using those narratives creates more racism in a community. I didn't say anything about the people involved in it. So I thank you for looking at practical reasons, and I'm appalled when somebody has an idea like detaining them as a solution, when that's the most impractical thing you could probably do. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you for your work, and thank you for explaining that. As Democrats, we must refuse to adopt illegal and ineffective solutions to this complex, long-standing crisis. We must be better than what we're seeing coming from Republicans. Republicans want to talk about Biden's border crisis, but the reality is we have a broken immigration system because Republicans want us to. So they can hold these hearings to mask The fact that they have no affirmative agenda that actually helps people. So they can spew their lies about immigrants bringing fentanyl across the border while exploiting victims and refusing to support investments in public health and addiction treatment. So they can take out their anger and insecurities on the most vulnerable. History will not look kindly on those politicians. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Humphrey.
To the gentlewoman from Missouri, Representative Bush.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
St. Louis and I rise in support of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. I've been to her district. I've spoken with her constituents. We visited marginalized communities globally together. This institution is better because of her leadership, and the Foreign Affairs Committee benefits from her perspective. So let's talk about what's really happening. Republicans are waging a blatantly Islamophobic and racist attack on Congresswoman Omar. And I've said it before, I will say it again. The white supremacy happening is unbelievable. This is despicable. It is Congresswoman Omar who has been harassed at her job for simply existing as a Muslim woman in Congress. It is she who has been attacked by a member of this body, ridiculing her as a potential terrorist for simply existing as a Muslim woman in this Congress. So rather than bring an actual accountability, any accountability to Congress, they bring this offensive resolution to the floor. This is just a bunch of racist gaslighting. We all know it. Vote no. St. Louis and I are here today to talk about the crisis posed by the power of private companies that operate social media platforms. Republicans are holding this hearing because of their ridiculous, politically motivated obsession with Hunter Biden. This is a distraction from their inability, again, to govern, and it hides the shared concerns raised by Republicans and Democrats alike about the vast power, impunity, and lack of accountability of social media platforms. There are so many examples of these companies responding inadequately or inappropriately in crisis that we have come to understand misconduct as the norm for social media giants and not an aberration. Social media played a key role in fanning the flames of violence on January 6th, on that attack on our U.S. Capitol. The impact has spread all over the world. Last fall, after Reuters reported that disinformation about Chile's proposed constitutional referendum was traveling 3 times faster on social media platforms than facts, several members of this committee wrote to Meta, Twitter, and TikTok, demanding further action to reduce the dissemination, reduce the lies, reduce the hate. They did nothing. Ms. Gaddy, you were at Twitter on January 6th and asked repeatedly for a retrospective meeting to discuss what happened in the lead up to that day. Management told you, quote, it wasn't a priority for the company. Why was it not a priority for Twitter to learn lessons from January 6th?
I don't believe you're referring to me. Apologies. I'm the chief legal officer. I did not make that statement.
So who do you want me to ask? Okay, Ms. Navaroli.
Would you mind repeating the question?
Sure. On January 6th, you were at Twitter and asked repeatedly for a retrospective meeting to discuss what happened in the lead up to that day. Management told you, quote, it wasn't a priority for that company. Why was it not a priority for Twitter to learn the lessons from January 6th?
I can't speak to leadership's motivations or why it would not have been a priority for them. What I can say is myself and individual members of my team repeatedly asked that we do a retrospective to understand not just what happened on January 6th, but leading into January 8th and the permanent suspension of the president.
What can you say is Twitter's top priority?
I can't speak to Twitter's top priority at this moment. I can say that, again, my team's responsibility was to balance free expression and safety and to ensure the safety and lack of harm for people on the ground.
Thank you. Twitter's top priority seems to be to maximize its profit. The people on this panel were among the top experts moderating content for equity and safety at Twitter, and your concerns were consistently steamrolled by executives pursuing profit. We know this situation must change, but I would argue that the structure of these corporations ensures this malpractice will continue. These social media companies have shown themselves unfit to maintain a digital public square with almost universal usage and vast power. Their purpose is not to facilitate healthy, fact-based discourse. It is to aggressively pursue profit for their billionaire executives and shareholders. Even when they make a good decision about removing a post or a user, it is only to make a profit. This existential problem will not be solved by asking these for-profit corporations to tweak their approach around the edges. We need to re-envision what the internet can be. Digital platforms, including social media, are here to stay, but we need to make sure that they operate for the public good and not the private interests. We need to invest in better alternatives to big tech, and we need to establish public ownership and control to ensure these platforms serve everyone fairly. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Perry for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman, and I thank the witness.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Over the past 2 years, through the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and other successes, Democrats and President Biden have made historic investments in public transit, renewable energy, health care, and economic stability. We have created jobs. We have advanced justice. We have advanced equity. We have reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and we have slowed down inflation. We put hundreds of dollars in people's pockets. We capped the price of insulin. We invested in people. As a result, when adjusted for inflation, wages have risen for so many families over the last 7 months, and unemployment remains at its lowest level since 1969. However, we need to do so much more. Many of our neighbors, particularly those with the greatest need, are suffering from the consequences of high costs across the board. I'm glad House Democrats controlled the House during the pandemic. This bill makes a mockery of people living in poverty who need meaningful relief. The Republicans' big idea, the big plan that we've been told about and waiting on, is to write a flawed bill that mandates, guess what? More paperwork. Give me a break, as my ranking member just said. I know what it's like to be at risk of eviction. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to be cold, so cold that you don't know if you'll survive the night. Never one time when I was living out of my car with my 2 babies did I ask for a report from Congress for help. I needed diapers. I needed food. You can't eat a report. If this bill was to move forward, no one will be saying, I'm so glad I used this report to pay the rent. Let me take shelter with this report because Congress did their job. Let's take real care, actual care of the people. I oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Recognize Ranking Member Bush for her opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. St. Louis and I are here today to have a serious discussion about what energy security looks like for people, not corporations. This hearing is not that discussion. If House Republicans actually cared about preventing an energy and economic crisis from happening, they would commit to investing in renewable energy. Unfortunately, there are no serious proposals being offered. Rising inflation caused by Russia's violent invasion of Ukraine and COVID-19 pandemic-related supply chain shortages, combined with dangerous corporate greed and a reliance on fossil fuels, has left the United States in a tenuous position of expensive, unreliable, and unsafe energy. Let's be clear, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was precisely created to be tapped in emergencies involving severe shortages of oil. Of course, I believe that the best way to avoid similar challenges in the future is to end our reliance on oil. But there should be no doubt that President Biden employed it explicitly for its stated purpose in an emergency when our nation's families and people needed it most. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, gas prices peaked at $4.88 in the Midwest region last year and are now down to $3.24 as of this week. People were struggling to get to doctor's appointments or to keep their heat on, and the Republican Party would have loved to do nothing. While the drawdown of the SPR was necessary to bolster supplies in an emergency, future events can be best ameliorated or prevented by reducing our demand for and our reliance on fossil fuels. But my Republican colleagues have unironically invited for-profit think tank and oil titans whose expertise is in maximizing profits, especially at the expense of our Black, our brown, and our indigenous neighbors' health, safety, and well-being. One of these so-called energy experts is a philosopher who has previously espoused white supremacist views. For instance, in his 2000 college newspaper, he wrote, quote, "The African and American Studies Department has 23 classes. In many of these classes, African culture is presented
Mr. Chairman,
not as
I demand
inferior."
the gentlelady's words be taken down. She just called the witness a white supremacist.
No, I referred to the words, not to the person, not to him, the words.
The gentlelady is referring to the witness's statement and referred
The
to him as
words?
a white supremacist. I would like a parliamentary
did
inquiry
not.
into
The
having
chair-
the
no,
gentlewoman's
excuse me.
I did
words
not.
taken down.
The chair recognizes Congresswoman Boebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like a parliamentary inquiry into taking down the gentlelady's words, the ranking member's words, for insinuating that our witness made white supremacist statements using his words.
Okay. The chair cannot take down words that are directed toward a witness, only to other members. All right. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Bush to continue her opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it appropriate for the ranking members to show respect to the witnesses who are here present in the committee room today?
I think it would obviously be warranted to show respect for any witness.
I would like that sentiment to be expressed and the members to be reminded to show respect to our witnesses who are here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Bush.
As I was saying, the African and African American Studies Department, this is the quote, has 23 classes. In many of these classes, African culture is presented not as inferior to Western culture, but as on equal footing with it. In other departments, the same is done with Latin American, Indian, and American Indian culture, end quote. When confronted about these views over 2 decades later, rather than disavow them, he doubled down on this narrative saying, quote, "It has nothing to do with skin color. I was arguing that those cultures overall are inferior to Western culture." We are not inferior to any culture, speaking as a descendant of one of those cultures. This is the witness the Republicans invited to discuss issues of energy security. He came here to promote fossil fuels, which we know are disproportionately harming and killing Black and brown people. Last week, I joined Ranking Member Raskin and all of my Democratic oversight colleagues in calling on oversight Republicans to denounce white nationalism and denounce white supremacy in all its forms. Not one single Republican joined us. So I ask again today, will my Republican colleagues condemn white supremacy and work with us to ensure this committee engages in advancing good and reducing harm rather than perpetuating it? That is respect. Our committee needs to be focused on actions that will help people and prevent financial hurt and pain. Whether we deploy the SPR or we don't, the instability of our energy system will continue if we are reliant on oil. Our committees need safe, reliable, renewable energy, and more investments in public transit. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, all the witnesses. And just as a reminder to the members, we're just starting out here. This is our first hearing. And the issues that we're debating are important not only to the members, but to the witnesses as well. And that said, this hearing and in future hearings we have in the subcommittee aren't about levying accusations and insults at our witnesses, at each other. I think that's disrespectful to everyone part of the process and folks that are here as well. Listening in. And quite frankly, it's a waste of time and I think it's unproductive. I ask the members to please refrain from this kind of behavior and focus on the topic of the hearing, which today is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and its depletions. Thank you very much. I recognize myself now for 5 minutes. Mr. Epstein, does the decision to deplete the SPR to historically low levels mean the Biden administration has no real plan for American energy policy?
I think saying no real plan is too charitable. I think they have a very bad plan. So the basic plan is to rapidly eliminate fossil fuels as soon as possible and then pretend that they can be replaced by unreliable solar and wind. And unfortunately, I'm seeing this advocated here today, but what the energy crisis should have taught us is that this doesn't work. You can only try to replace fossil fuels once you have truly cost-effective alternatives, which means reliable alternatives, and which means replacing all uses of fossil fuels, including heavy-duty transportation, industrial heat, et cetera. So, I mean, it's worse than no policy. I wish they had no policy.
Presidents have only declared emergency releases of the SPR on 3 previous occasions: Operation Desert Storm, Hurricane Katrina, and following the military intervention in Libya. Did the Biden administration properly use, in your opinion, the SPR?
No, as I tried to indicate in my testimony, I mean, it's wildly improper, and I think particularly if you hear this rationalization of, oh, the conflict in Russia, whenever you have an escalating international conflict, that's when you need to keep your reserve as high as possible. So the idea of just depleting it to half of its level when we don't know what could happen going forward, you know, this is really, really precarious, and I think it's pretty obviously politically driven. And, you know, the obvious thing to do, you know, we're hearing talk about, well, this oil price increases hurt low-income families. This is absolutely true. But if this administration cared about that, why did every action they took lead to higher prices? Why did they cancel a Keystone XL? Why did they threaten the industry? You know, I guarantee you we're going to end fossil fuel. Why have they been focused on having the SEC be sicked on fossil fuel companies? Why was there a leasing ban on federal lands? Like, every action was directed at making oil more expensive and thus harming low-income families along with everyone else.
Well, you just answered my next question, so thank you for that. Okay. Mr. Bushuev, one of the other witnesses said that renewables are by far the most cost-effective source of energy. Do you agree with that?
Well, sun doesn't always shine and wind doesn't always blow. As I said in my testimony, storage is the backbone of financial markets. You can get renewables, but renewables can't really do a whole lot without the storage. So it's not a question about renewables. Renewables are great, but we need batteries. So if we don't have storage, I mean, there's not a whole lot you can do.
And, sir, how has China benefited from the decision to deplete the U.S. SPR?
Well, I don't know if China benefited, but let's the data in China is very difficult to get, so nobody really knows. But one thing that I know, that we used to have 1 billion barrels in SPR, in a reserve. Half of it was SPR, half of it was private. Now we're down to about 800 million. And 10 years ago, China had about 1/5 of what we had, about 200 million. And based on the third-party data, last year, China surpassed 1 billion. So we're kind of going down. China inventory is going up. Unfortunately, there is no clean data to put two lines on the same graph. But based on what I've seen, they're really mirror image of each other. So as our inventories are depleting, the China inventories are growing.
So China we used to have 5 times the reserves that China had
Correct.
Now they have 3 times, most likely 3 times what we have.
Not necessarily. As I said, our inventory is about 800 million. 370 is SPR.
And then
the rest is private, but private to what extent you can rely on them because they're held by refineries. So if there is a crisis, refineries are going to use them. You're correct that China has 3 times more than the government stocked. That is an accurate statement.
Okay. And Mr. Epstein, just a little off topic, but Western culture that you mentioned could exist in countries, let's say in Japan.
Well, yeah, and it has proliferated to the great benefit of all. And it's not really about the location. It's about individualism and freedom and reason. So it's certain values that are universal human values. The idea that freedom and reason and individualism only apply to people of certain skin colors, that is the actual original racist idea versus no. Whatever your skin color is, these ideas are true and good for human flourishing.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Speaker, St. Louis and I rise against the Speaker of this House sending members of Congress home on a break as he is taking our economy hostage in service of his dangerous MAGA Republican agenda designed to gut social programs that save lives. We are on the brink of economic disaster because of a fabricated Republican ultimatum, and the Speaker has decided to send everyone home. This is not a game. Real people and real lives hang in the balance, but the Speaker seems intent on holding our economy hostage and rewarding himself with a break, as he is bringing us to the brink of a default that would devastate communities like mine in St. Louis. Just over 2 years ago, the Republican Party tried to hold our democracy hostage. Now they're holding our economy hostage. They're gambling with Social Security checks, gambling with Medicare and Medicaid benefits, with food for children, and with people's rent money. And that's a bad deal. The Dems are here. The Dems are here. The Dems are here. And we are saying, where are the Republicans? Sign the discharge petition. Madam Speaker, will you sign the discharge petition? Where are the Republicans? Sign the discharge petition. The Speaker needs to do his job. Now, I yield back. Thank you. And thank you to all the witnesses for being here today, and to the Democrats who showed up 2-1 to this hearing that was called by the Republicans. Thank you so much. And let me also say, it is astounding how often we hear about wokeness from people who have no idea what woke actually means and where it stems from. But let me just say, as Black folks who stood up to say that no more will we allow these injustices to continue to happen on our communities, we spoke up, and I can speak to it because I'm one of those folks that was on the ground for more than 400 days after the killing of Michael Brown when that came about. We said we woke up because we won't allow anyone else to do this to us without us fighting back. And so when you say I'm anti-woke, when you talk about wokeness, you're saying I'm anti-Black, and I don't want Black people to speak up for themselves. I don't want equality and justice for Black folks. So I say to those that say wokeness, we're anti-woke. This is not wokeness, what we talked about in here. And you should be on the side of folks who are woke because we're saying no more oppression against our community. So whatever else is being thrown around, unless you are saying I'm racist, white supremacist, and I'm bigoted, stop talking about wokeness. And you can't tell me that I'm wrong because I'm from the very movement where this came about. Don't let a fascist tell you what being woke means. Now, responsible investing, which has nothing to do with wokeness, depends on ESG data to facilitate planning for long-term challenges, requiring firms to disclose more data about their risk and returns, and how that helps to protect our future by investing in climate resilience and clean energy. And this is good for our planet, it's good for business. Climate and extreme weather-related events already affect both small and large businesses every single day. Investors deserve to know which companies are taking appropriate steps to mitigate climate threats to their bottom lines. This is not about wokeness. ESG also helps workers, ensuring that their pensions are not going to companies that will later privatize and degrade jobs. Democrats are working to protect the public's access to data and make responsible investment choices. The Biden-Harris administration Securities and Exchange Commission and Department of Labor's rules allow for more information to be provided to investors. They are not mandates to consider ESG. Republicans' attacks on ESG, they hurt taxpayers by raising costs, like in Texas where anti-ESG bill, that bill cost the public an additional $300 to $500 million in interest in just 8 months. Republicans' anti-ESG crusade, it protects their fossil fuel donors to the detriment of people's retirement security and their freedom to invest. Republicans' political crusade against responsible investing and calling it wokeness, be woke. Don't be anti-Black. It is investing, it's against responsible investing in an attempt to manufacture a culture war that you know nothing about and you're not standing up to fight against, and interfere in free market trends and protect corporate interest. And with that, I will say, don't speak about something that you don't know about. Learn about it from the people who are the ones that are most directly impacted, and change your language. Enough is enough. This is not about being woke. Being woke is the side of history you should be on. Wake up to the fact that other people are burdened differently than you, that other people have issues that you don't even understand, but you should be sensitive to. Wake up to that. And with that, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. St. Louis and I are here today in opposition to Republicans' continuing assault on our democracy and in support of political self-determination for the residents of Washington, D.C. Let's get one thing straight at the top. The idea that Republicans care about election integrity in D.C. is a joke. Just 2 years ago, I was barricaded in my office right here in D.C. This is the party of insurrection whose supporters attacked the Capitol in an attempt to overthrow what? A democratic election. When Republicans talk about election integrity, they're really talking about voter suppression. They're talking about carrying on the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow by actively disenfranchising Black and brown communities through legislation like the American Confidence in Elections Act to undermine voter access and fair and impartial election administration. And they're talking about maintaining anti-democratic control over D.C., which has had a significant Black population since its creation, was majority Black from the late 1950s through 2011, and remains majority non-white. The United States is the only democracy in the world that denies the residents of its capital voting representation in the national legislature. D.C. residents have been demanding voting representation in Congress for more than 200 years. And in a 2016 referendum, 86% of D.C. residents voted for statehood. Republicans want to pretend that D.C. statehood is a power grab for the Democrats, a power grab for the Democratic Party. They say it's a political ploy to gain seats in the Senate. But that just doesn't really make sense. So, Ms. Weiser, if D.C. became a state, would Republicans be forbidden from running in its congressional elections?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so they can still run. Okay, got it. Let me ask you, Ms. Weiser, in a democracy, should political rights be controlled, be conditioned on who voters might elect?
No, absolutely not. That would be inappropriate.
It would be inappropriate. Thank you. So D.C. statehood is not about one party or the other. It's about freedom, and it's about political self-determination. It's about overcoming the white supremacist violence of voter suppression in this here historically Black city. It's about the voices of real people whose lives and whose struggles matter. So Republicans should stop the hypocrisy. Again, I remember being barricaded in my office trying to figure out how to protect my staff, and my words were, if they come to this door, we bang into the end. And I meant that. If you touch my staff, because they didn't sign up for this. They didn't sign up to be in a position to where their bodies are on the line. They signed up to do a work for the people of St. Louis. So stop the hypocrisy. Stop talking about don't tread on me, when that's exactly what that party is doing to the people of D.C. Stop trampling on their lives. Stop trampling on their freedoms. Stop trampling on our democracy. Stop holding D.C. hostage and let Congress, once and for all, grant the people of D.C. what they've been long demanding: statehood. Thank you, and I yield.
Will the gentlelady yield? Will the gentlelady yield?
You still got it, go. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, were you still questioning?
I started saying it, so.
I yield back to you.
Okay, well, I yield back to you, Chairman. St. Louis and I are here today in defense of strong government regulations that keep the public safe. Republicans claim that regulations slow down the economy and stifle innovation, but it's pure fantasy to expect entire industries to self-regulate without government oversight. Regulations like workplace safety standards enforced by OSHA, environmental protection provisions enforced by the EPA, FDA requirements for food production all keep our communities safer. A world without regulations will look like asbestos in our schools and workplaces, every corporation dumping chemicals into rivers, and unfettered use of child labor, and no safety standards for building construction, for housing, transportation, agriculture, or consumer products. According to my colleagues across the aisle, these regulations don't matter, but that doesn't mean they're anti-regulation. Republicans want to regulate access to abortions. Republicans want to regulate access to gender-affirming care. Republicans want to regulate books for school children. None of those issues make us safer. We have decades of research that proves giant corporations like Walmart, Amazon, Exxon, Microsoft, Monsanto will cut corners to save a few pennies, all while making their chief executives and their shareholders even more rich. If we rely on these industries to self-regulate, we will undoubtedly end up with more public health crises like oil spills and water contamination. And I'm not willing to pay that price. St. Louis, home to Coldwater Creek and home to Westlake Landfill, we are not willing to pay that price. While these examples are extreme, you may say, the premise is not. Federal regulations and modern and effective regulatory process keeps our communities safer. Regulations keep the financial system strong. They strive to keep drug prices low and health care accessible and affordable. They ensure that people trying to get a good education or buy a home for their families are not defrauded by opportunistic and greedy corporations. Ms. Katzen, can you provide an example of a federal regulation that was rolled back during the Trump administration that has resounding impacts today?
Well, there were many examples of rollbacks. Profound, that may be in the judgment of the observer. I'm thinking of one that recently the Biden administration is resurrecting, and that's the gainful employment. We have an industry of for-profit educational institutions that, with some misleading data and other activities, attract a number of people to spend a lot of money, and then they have no opportunities ever to recoup that because they're not well trained and they're not able to find the kind of employment. And during the Obama administration, they restricted taxpayer-supplied support for those for-profit institutions, and President Trump rolled that back. Now, President Biden is going forward again to reinstate that. There are other examples in the environment. I think Mr. Raskin talked about mountaintop mining, where companies come in and just slice off the top of the mountain and it rolls down and it contaminates the streams and the water supplies for the communities around it. And then I think of coal dust. I mean, there's any number of instances where deregulation and rolling back protections has led to disasters.
Thank you for those insights. As you said, there are countless examples of industries and companies failing to self-regulate with catastrophic economic results. This year, the United States experienced its second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in history after banks like the Silicon Valley Bank lobbied to repeal regulations put in place by Dodd-Frank and then failed catastrophically. The oil and gas industry pushed for deregulation and lax oversight that contributed to the disastrous BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, killing 11 people and causing an estimated $65 billion in economic losses. At the urging of industry and referencing standards drafted by the very industry it was supposedly regulating, former President Trump's Department of Interior rolled back safeguards to prevent another disaster. This is absurd. I will turn it back over to you. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes.
Question will be the Republicans will be squeezed. I think the gentlelady's time has expired. We'll now go to the gentlelady from. I appreciate your answer, Mr. Durham. I think we understand where you're headed. The gentlelady from Missouri is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. St. Louis and I are here today to set the record straight about this political investigation conducted on behalf of the twice impeached, twice indicted former white supremacist in chief, Donald Trump. From the start, this entire investigation has been an attempt to undermine the findings of the Mueller investigation and distract the people of this country from Donald Trump's corruption. That's why it began just days after the release of the Mueller report. And that's why 4 years later, and no matter how much my colleagues across the aisle claim otherwise, the Durham investigation did not exonerate Mr. Trump or any of his associates. Mr. Durham, I'd like to briefly discuss a few of the different Trump-related items that your report does not touch on. In the interest of time, you can just simply answer yes or no. The Mueller report found that Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort knowingly shared internal polling data and information on battleground states with a Russian spy. Did you find this to be untrue?
I did not find that to be untrue.
Thank you. Thank you for that. The Mueller report found that Mr. Manafort shared this internal polling data with a Russian asset with the expectation it would be shared with Putin-linked oligarch Oleg Deripaska. Did you find this to be untrue?
I didn't find it to be untrue, but I didn't look at it either.
The Mueller report found that Russian military hackers first targeted Hillary Clinton's personal office within hours of Trump's infamous July 27, 2016 press conference, which we've heard already, where he said, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. Did you find this to be untrue?
When you say this, what? That Mr. Trump clearly said that. It is publicly recorded.
Did you find, the Mueller report found that Russian military hackers first targeted her personal office within hours of the infamous press conference, where Trump said, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails.
And if that was,
did you find this to be untrue?
I did not find that to be untrue.
Thank you. So again, your investigation, Mr. Durham, did not undercut the basic findings of the Mueller report. Those who read your report as exonerating Donald Trump are willfully deluding themselves and the people of this country. And let's take a step back for a minute. In the chaos created by all these conspiracy theories and other propaganda amplified by right-wing hate machine, the one we continue to hear, a very simple point is getting lost. Republicans will do anything, say anything, and spend any amount of money to hide the basic truth that their leader is a criminal, corrupt, narcissistic buffoon. That's why we're still talking about Carter Page. That's why anyone even knows who John Durham is. That's why Republicans are still carrying on Mr. Durham's work by launching frivolous investigations that end with them embarrassing themselves by propping up obvious lies. It has always been about gaslighting the country. So instead of holding these farcical hearings about farcical investigations, I urge my colleagues, my Republican colleagues, to get serious and start legislating on behalf of their constituents instead of helping the twice impeached, twice indicted Donald Trump further evade accountability. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Recognize the gentlelady from Missouri.
Thank you. St. Louis and I are here today in strong support of the rights of workers, of consumers, small businesses, and the broader public to be free from corporate greed that monopolizes our access to information and treats employees and communities as expendable. Thank you for being here, Chair Khan. I appreciate your service as a staffer on this committee, your groundbreaking scholarship on antitrust law and anti-monopoly issues, and your record of accomplishments as FTC chair. The Commission has an important role to play in protecting our economy from the harms caused by greedy, reckless corporations that put profit and power over people. Look at big tech, big pharma, big oil, and any other concentrated industry. These companies and the profit-obsessed executives behind them have abused their power for too long, and it's time that they be held accountable. So we absolutely need to level the playing field for workers and consumers. The FTC can and is trying to help under your leadership, and I appreciate that because it makes a real difference in communities like mine. For example, in recent years, FTC lawsuits have resulted in more than $33 million provided to more than 178,000 Missourians. In 2020 alone, the FTC provided $8.6 million to people in Missouri, including St. Louis. That's real money for real people harmed by corporate greed. It's food on the table, it's a roof over a head, it's clothing for a child. Another example is the FTC's proposed rule to ban non-compete agreements. Chair Khan, as was brought up earlier, banning non-compete agreements is estimated to raise wages by over $200 billion each year and to close racial and gender wage gaps by up to 9.1%. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, as we laid out in our notice of proposed rulemaking, those are some of the estimated effects, yes.
Thank you. It's a lot of money in the pockets of workers and Black and brown people and women in particular. Can you explain specifically how banning non-compete agreements means workers will get paid more?
So what our staff did is they looked very closely at the empirical evidence that has now surfaced in light of the different state policies that we've seen. And what we've seen is that states that have limited non-competes are able to ensure that workers are moving them around more freely, though unfortunately we still see that all too often companies are still trying to include non-competes. What we've also seen is that being able to switch jobs, being able to move freely between jobs and get better job opportunities is a key mechanism that workers have to use to be able to get higher wages and better employment opportunities. When you freeze workers in place, when you lock them in place through these non-competes, that means that they're not able to go across the street, even though the firm across the street is offering them better wages or better working conditions, and that's bad for workers.
Absolutely. Thank you, and that's a real impact that will save lives. But Republicans don't like this. The party that is in the pocket of white supremacists and wealthy corporations will talk a big game about fighting for everyday people and then show up to Congress and do whatever their corporate donors want them to do. That's what these attacks, that's what this is about. So let me be clear. There is nothing unethical about standing up for workers, consumers, and small businesses. There is nothing unethical about enforcing the law against powerful and destructive companies like Amazon, Meta, and Twitter. There is nothing unethical about putting your principles into practice. But what's unethical is being apologists for the corporate greed that is fleecing our communities. What's unethical is claiming to care about workers and then selling them out. That's the real ethics scandal here, and we need not forget it. The bottom line is that the corporate monopolies are a recipe for social destruction. Any lawmakers who claim to stand for workers and consumers must advocate against dominance by large private companies that care more about profit than people. We need to aggressively enforce our antitrust laws for the purposes Congress intended, and we also need to move beyond the digital economy dominated by billionaire-owned for-profit companies. Chair Khan, you have never tried to hide who you are or what you believe, and I admire you for that. I thank you for your leadership, and I look forward to working with you and your agency on these critical issues. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I recognize the...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. St. Louis and I are here today to discuss the real economic situation of the people of this country. From gas prices to food, The cost of living is rising. New census data indicates that real incomes fell significantly in 2022 as inflation reduced the size of our constituents' paychecks. We know there are investments that the federal government can make to reduce poverty. The Republican Party's inability to govern has us rapidly moving toward a total government shutdown. This will disrupt important benefits and services for all of our constituents, such as food and cash assistance. Too many people around this country, across this country, are struggling to make ends meet. A government shutdown would affect more than 42 million people who receive SNAP benefits, nearly 3 million people who receive TANF benefits, and over 6 million participants who receive WIC benefits. Congress pulled together in a crisis to provide COVID relief, this emergency relief that people needed. My vision of a progressive economy led by the Biden administration must include Medicare for all, must include raising the federal minimum wage, ensuring housing affordability, reinstating the child tax credit, and canceling student debt. That's my vision. During the pandemic, we made direct payments to families through the child tax credit and provided student debt relief by freezing interest and payments. We still need to do more now. These two concrete examples show Congress can ease the effects of economic hardship and boost the economy overall. When it was in place, the child tax credit lifted nearly 4 million children from poverty, causing child poverty to hit a historic low of 5.2%. The expanded child tax credit slashed child poverty, infused local economies with billions of dollars, and reduced food insecurity by nearly 1/3. In Missouri alone, the child tax credit lifted 73,000 children out of poverty. Without the child tax credit, child poverty in the United States has more than doubled in just 1 year. Since its expiration, nearly 3.7 million children have fallen back into poverty, including the impacted children of Missouri. Millions of people in this country are buried in burdensome debt to make ends meet. Medical, credit card, and student debt. Student debt payments will resume soon after numerous payment pauses extended by the Biden administration. Through temporary relief, though that temporary relief has helped many, we need much more, and we must cancel student debt. The federal student loan portfolio currently totals more than $2 trillion, owed by over 40 million borrowers. Black people carry the heaviest debt burden, meaning student debt, say it again, student debt relief is a racial and an economic justice issue. As lawmakers, we must ensure education leads to prosperity, education leads to opportunity, rather than inescapable debt. While my Republican colleagues are slashing programs that help keep kids out of poverty and fighting against student debt relief every step of the way, we have an over $880 billion defense package moving forward. The money is there. The question is how we as elected officials choose to invest in our communities. The money is there. We can deliver for our constituents and help them out to not only survive, but to prosper. Republicans are trying to distract us from the internal dysfunction which is steering our nation toward a government shutdown. The question is, do we choose to invest in defense contractors or reduce poverty for millions of people? Thank you, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Despite my colleagues' claims, the U.S. economy is actually growing, and this growth directly contrasts with failed Republican economy policies that include the massive tax giveaway that former President Trump signed into law 2018, which prompted the most severe economic contraction in the United States since 1946 and cost the United States $1.9 billion. Republicans' economic proposals do not work and are currently driving us toward a government shutdown that will hurt families and devastate our economy. Rather than having yet another hearing to bolster Republican talking points, we should be focused on funding the government. In less than 2 weeks, millions of families in need will lose access to vital programs such as SNAP, TANF, WIC, and the administration of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid will grind to a halt because our federal workforce will be unable to serve our communities. Just a couple of hours ago, House Republican leaders postponed voting on a rule to bring a stopgap bill to the floor. We also know that a shutdown would have a devastating impact on the economy. The partial shutdown from 2018 to 2019 reduced economic output in the United States by $11 billion over 2 quarters, $3 billion of which the economy never regained. The difference is clear and of massive consequence to our communities. Economic recovery should be the highest priority of the Biden administration, and we are thankful. With that, I yield back. Let me get to another person. Yes.
Great TV. Congresswoman Bush, obviously your support for the Palestinian community is great, but you still face a lot of criticism at home for being perceived as anti-Semitic. What's your response to that criticism?
So, first of all, let me just say, I have condemned anti-Semitism 800 times over and over, and not just since October the 7th. But this is the thing. As much as it is unacceptable and it is intolerable, we also can't conflate the criticism of Israel, the Israeli government, with anti-Semitism. And we also have to stop with the words. It's this word, you said that word, you said this word, it hurt me. Well, how much hurt do people feel when the bombs hit them? Like, that's what I'm worried about. Yeah. This word hurt me. You used this word. Well, a word was used, but you are safe. A word was used and you stand here in this country and you're able to walk in and out of your home. You're able to walk to the grocery store. You're able to tuck your kid in at night. You're not worried about if today is the day the bomb hits you. And so, no, I am not anti-Semitic. I have called for peace for everyone. All life is sacred, and I will not continue to allow people to try to distract by calling me or my colleagues anti-Semitic. You can take it how you want, but at the end of the day, we are the ones that continue to show up and fight for all. When we had a vigil, when Rashida Tlaib and I had a vigil along with our colleagues right there on those steps, and we said we're going to mourn and grieve the lives of all Israelis and all Palestinians killed, where were the rest of our colleagues? Where were all the people who received the information that this was going to be something that was open for them to show up to? They didn't show up. You can take a look at the photo. Look at the photo when they said this is for the Israeli lives lost versus the photo for Israeli and Palestinian lives lost. So who is speaking up for all the people? Who are the ones that are actually for all people, not for some people? That is us, and we're going to continue to do that.
I yield a minute and a half to the gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Bush.
The gentlelady is recognized for 90 seconds.
St. Louis and I rise because we are tired of extreme Republican antics that seek to put politics over the needs of people. Under Republican leadership, the House has successfully passed just 14 bills. Some of these were bills to punt an impending government shutdown, which we all know was only avoided thanks to the Democrats. And let us not forget that their complete and utter inability to govern resulted in an entire chamber of Congress from being able to perform its basic duties for 17 days, 17 failed speaker votes, and multiple failed speaker candidates. Their house is not in order. Republicans haven't delivered on any top public priorities like strengthening Social Security, delivering environmental protections, or boosting our economy. Politically motivated censures like this one that target Black and brown members of Congress, like this one, are not only a waste of time, they are a distraction. The people aren't falling for it. Republicans should actually legislate rather than play useless political games like this attempt to censure Representative Jamal Bowman. I yield back.
Yields back. Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady continues to reserve. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr.